My daughter stood before me on the steps of her $150,000 wedding and told me I wasn't welcome. She didn't seem to understand that my presence wasn't just a social courtesy. It was the only thing keeping the lights on. I smiled, nodded, and walked away without a word. By the time the champagne was supposed to be poured, her dream wedding had become a financial nightmare, and I was the one holding the plug. Before I tell you how a 76-year-old man brought an entire high society wedding to its knees with a single phone call, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And please hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to teach someone the hard lesson that respect is not optional. The air in Atlanta hangs heavy in late spring, a thick, humid blanket that promises either a thunderstorm or a blessedly cool evening. As I stood before the grand entrance of the Magnolia Estates, it felt like the storm was brewing inside my own chest. I know this place. I should. My company, Ellington Construction, poured the foundation and raised the walls of this very building a decade ago. I remember telling my late wife, Rose, that we were building a place where people would make the happiest memories of their lives. I never imagined it would be the place my own daughter would try to break my heart. I wore my best suit, a custom charcoal gray piece that fit my old frame perfectly. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. I had come prepared to be the proud father of the bride, to walk my only child down the aisle and place her hand in the hand of the man she had chosen. I had come to honor her and to honor the memory of her mother. But I never made it past the limestone portico. She came out to meet me, a vision in white. The dress alone cost more than the first house Rose and I ever bought. But her face was pale, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. Behind her, just inside the doorway, stood Trevor Harrison, her fiancé. He was tall, with the kind of soft, unworked hands and easy smile that comes from a life where doors are always opened for you. He wasn't smiling now. He stood with his arms crossed, a silent guard at the gate of his new kingdom. Danielle, my Danny, stopped a few feet from me. "Dad," she started, her voice a nervous whisper. "I didn't think you'd actually come." The words hung in the humid air between us. I kept my voice even calm, the way I always do when negotiating a difficult contract. "I paid for this place, Danny. I paid for the dress, the flowers, the 300 guests who are currently drinking champagne that I bought. Of course I was going to come." She finally looked at me, but her eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading shame. "I'm sorry," she stammered, twisting a diamond bracelet on her wrist. The bracelet I gave her for her 30th birthday. "You weren't invited. It's just Trevor's family. They wanted a more intimate affair." Intimate. That was the word she chose. As if I was some stranger, some business acquaintance, and not the man who taught her how to ride a bike and checked for monsters under her bed. Before I could respond, Trevor stepped forward, placing a proprietary hand on Danielle's arm. He looked at me not as a future son-in-law, but as a problem to be managed. "Charles," he said, his voice smooth and condescending, "we appreciate your contribution immensely, but this is Danny's day. Let's respect her wishes." His day, her wishes, and my contribution. He made it sound like I had simply made a donation to a charity. I looked past him, past my daughter, and into the grand ballroom. I could see his parents, the Harrisons, laughing with a group of people, their heads held high with the kind of pride that comes from hosting an event you couldn't possibly afford on your own. And in that moment, I saw it all with perfect clarity. I wasn't family to them. I was the bank, a silent partner whose name was not to be spoken in polite company. The old money family from Buckhead couldn't bear to have the black contractor from the South Side, the man whose calloused hands paid for their son's fantasy, actually present at the ceremony. I was the inconvenient, embarrassing truth behind their perfect white wedding. I looked back at my daughter, my Danny, who I had raised to be strong, to be proud of who she was and where she came from. And I saw the weakness in her eyes, the desperate need to be accepted by these people who so clearly looked down on us. She had made her choice. She had chosen their world over ours. A lesser man might have raged. He might have stormed into that ballroom and announced to everyone who had paid for the party, but that was never my way. Rose always said that anger was a cheap tool. It makes a lot of noise, but it can't build anything that lasts. Dignity, she used to say, is the only thing a man can't afford to lose. So I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I looked my daughter in the eye, and for a moment I let her see the pain she had caused. Then I masked it behind a calm facade. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, daughter," I said softly. And the way I said the word daughter made her flinch. I turned my back on the wedding I had paid for and walked away. The sound of the orchestra starting up inside felt like a door slamming shut behind me. I sat in my Lincoln Navigator for a long time, the engine off, the silence of the parking garage a welcome relief. The air inside the car was still and warm. I didn't drive away. I just sat there, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I stared at the dashboard, at the small faded photograph tucked into the sun visor. It was a picture of my Rose taken 20 years ago on a trip to Savannah. She was smiling, her eyes full of the light and life that had been the center of my world. Looking at her, I felt the sharp sting of my failure. I had promised her I would always protect our daughter, and in my effort to give Danielle everything, I had somehow failed to give her the one thing that mattered most, a strong foundation. A sense of self-worth that couldn't be bought or sold or traded away for a place at a fancier table. My mind went back to a conversation Rose and I had just before she got sick. We were sitting on our porch swing, watching a teenage Danielle talking on the phone inside, already dreaming of a life far away from our quiet neighborhood. Rose had a worried look in her eyes. "Charles," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "we're giving that girl the world, but we have to make sure she knows how to hold it. Money is easy, but strength is hard. Promise me something." I took her hand. "Anything, my love." "If she ever loses her way," Rose continued, "if she ever starts to believe that what we give her is more important than who she is, don't just pull her back. Don't make it easy. Let her find her own way home. But make sure the road you build for her is built on a foundation of truth, no matter how hard that truth is. A foundation of truth. I am a builder. I understand foundations. A foundation isn't just about support. It's about limits. It's about setting boundaries that cannot be crossed. And my daughter had just crossed a boundary. She had traded the solid rock of family for the shifting sand of social status. And that was a structure I knew would never hold. The promise I made to my wife all those years ago was not just a whisper on a porch swing. It was a blueprint. After she passed, I worked with my lawyer Marcus to turn that promise into something tangible, something real. A series of financial structures and legal trusts, all designed with one purpose: to provide for Danielle, but to also protect our family's legacy and its core values. A plan for a day just like this one. I took a deep, steadying breath. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but now it was mixed with resolve. I wasn't acting out of anger or revenge. I was acting out of love. The tough, painful, foundational love that my Rose had taught me. I was about to teach my daughter a lesson about the true cost of things. I reached for my phone. I didn't scroll through my contacts. I knew the number by heart. I pressed the call button, and it rang only once before it was answered. "Sir." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and familiar. It was Marcus Vance, my lawyer, my financial manager, and a man I trusted more than anyone on this earth. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Marcus, it's me." There was a brief pause, but it was not a pause of confusion. It was a pause of understanding. He knew why I was calling. "I understand, sir," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "Shall I proceed with the Rose Foundation protocol?" The Rose Foundation protocol. The name we had given our contingency plan. Named for the woman who inspired it. Named for the values it was meant to protect. I looked out the windshield at the grand facade of the Magnolia Estates, the building my hands had helped raise, and I gave the order that would bring it all down. "Activate it," I said, my voice as steady as steel. "Immediately." "Consider it done, sir," Marcus replied. The line went dead. I put the phone down, started the engine, and drove out of that parking garage without looking back. The storm was about to break. Inside the Magnolia Estates, the chaos began, not with a shout, but with a silent, blinking red notification on an iPad. Brenda, the wedding coordinator. A woman renowned for her unflappable demeanor in the face of any crisis, from a collapsed cake to a missing groom, felt the first tremor of genuine panic. She was double-checking the timeline for the reception when the message flashed across her screen. Payment status reversed. She stared at it, her perfectly glossed lips parting slightly. $150,000. The entire fee for the venue. Reversed. It had to be a glitch, a bank error. Such a thing was impossible. The Ellington account was solid as granite. They had checked. She excused herself from a conversation with the mother of the groom and hurried to her temporary office, her heels clicking an anxious rhythm on the marble floor. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in a sleek downtown office overlooking the Atlanta skyline, Marcus Vance was the calm at the center of the storm he was creating. He sat before a triptych of monitors, a headset on, speaking in the measured, unhurried tones of a man who held all the cards. "That's correct, Mr. Dubois," he said into the mouthpiece, his eyes scanning a digital copy of a contract. "We are invoking Clause 7.3b of the vendor agreement. The payment for floral arrangements is being recalled." He listened for a moment, his expression unchanging. "The clause stipulates that all payments are finalized only upon confirmation of the event by the principal investor. As the principal investor is not in attendance, the preliminary payment has been reverted. Yes, all $50,000. Have a good day." He terminated the call and immediately initiated another. Back at the wedding, the first domino had struck the second. The head chef, a famously temperamental Frenchman named Jean-Pierre, burst from the kitchen, his white toque askew, his face the color of a ripe tomato. He was waving his phone in the air, bellowing at a terrified-looking assistant. "What do you mean the payment for the beef has been withdrawn?" 300 portions of Wellington. The truffles. The foie gras. This is not possible. The guests still sipping their champagne and nibbling on canapes. The payment for which had just evaporated from the caterer's bank account began to turn and stare, their polite chatter faltering. In his office, Marcus was speaking to the catering company's accountant. "I understand your frustration," he said, though his voice conveyed no actual sympathy. "However, the contract you signed is ironclad. It was a conditional prepayment. The condition was the physical presence and final verbal approval of Mr. Charles Ellington. That condition was not met. The funds have been returned to the trust. There is nothing further to discuss." He clicked his mouse, and another wire transfer reversed its course. Now the chaos was cascading. The string quartet, having just finished a beautiful rendition of a Vivaldi piece, began packing their instruments. The lead violinist had received a text from their agent. "Money's gone. Pack it up." Brenda, the coordinator, intercepted them. Her voice strained. "What are you doing? You're contracted for another 3 hours." The violinist just shook his head. The contract was voided. No pay, no play. They walked out, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. Then the most surreal moment of all, the florist Mr. Dubois arrived with 2 assistants and began methodically, almost surgically, dismantling the spectacular arch of white orchids under which Danielle and Trevor were meant to be married. Guests gasped, pulling out their phones to record the bizarre spectacle. Trevor and his parents, the Harrisons, finally realized this was more than a minor hiccup. They descended upon Brenda, their faces a mixture of confusion and indignation. "What is the meaning of this, Mr.?" Harrison blustered, his voice a little too loud. "This is an outrage." Brenda, holding her iPad like a shield, showed him the notification. "The payment from the Ellington account was reversed, sir. All of it. We can't proceed." Mrs. Harrison scoffed, pulling a platinum credit card from her designer handbag. "This is absurd. A simple bank error. We will handle it. Put it on this." She handed the card to Brenda with a dismissive wave. Brenda ran the card. A moment later, she handed it back, her expression grim. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison. It was declined." Mr. Harrison produced his own card. Declined. Trevor, his face now slick with sweat, tried his. Declined. The Harrisons, who had built their entire social identity on the illusion of old money, were standing in a room full of their peers, financially naked. It's a funny thing about foundations. People only notice them when they start to crack. And I had known for months that the foundation of the Harrison family was nothing but sand and pretense. This wasn't a guess. It was a fact. Before I ever agreed to write a single check for this wedding, I had Marcus do what I've always done before starting a major project, a full and thorough due diligence report. I didn't get to where I am by being naive. I got here by measuring twice and cutting once, by reading the fine print, and by understanding the structural integrity of the people I do business with. And this wedding for the Harrisons was nothing more than a business deal. Marcus's report was comprehensive. It laid bare the truth behind their carefully maintained facade, the failing investments, the second mortgage on their Buckhead mansion, the mountain of debt hidden behind a prestigious family name. They weren't just solvent, they were drowning. They saw my daughter not as a future member of their family, but as a financial life raft. They saw me as the fool who would pay to build it for them. They underestimated me. They thought because my hands were rough from a lifetime of real work, My mind must be simple. That was their first mistake. I remember the first time I met them. They invited me to dinner at their country club. The whole evening was a masterclass in polite condescension. They talked about their European vacations, their family's long history in Georgia, their son's bright future. It was all a performance, a way of establishing their supposed superiority. The defining moment came over dessert. Mrs. Harrison Catherine turned to me with a smile that never reached her eyes. "So, Charles," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "Danielle tells us you're in construction. How fascinating. I imagine you must have been very fortunate to get some of those big government contracts back in the 90s. The implication was clear. My success wasn't earned. It was the result of luck or some affirmative action handout. She was trying to put me in a box to diminish me, to make me feel like I didn't belong at their table. I just took a slow sip of my water and smiled right back at her. "No, ma'am," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I wasn't fortunate. I was just the first man on the job site every morning and the last man to leave every night. I didn't have contracts. I had a strong back and a good name. I built my fortune the same way I build my buildings, from the ground up, one brick at a time." Her smile faltered. But I knew then with absolute certainty what kind of people they were, and I knew I had to protect my daughter from them, even if it meant protecting her from herself. Back in the chaos of the unraveling wedding, that truth was finally coming home to roost. The whispers among the guests had turned into a low roar. People were leaving, shaking their heads in disbelief and embarrassment. Trevor had cornered Danielle near the now dismantled floral arch. The charming, sophisticated mask was gone. His face was twisted in an ugly sneer. "How could you let this happen?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "I told you to handle him. I told you your father was a liability." Danielle looked stunned, as if she were seeing him for the first time. "Me? How is this my fault? He's my father. What did you expect me to do?" "I expected you to manage the situation." Trevor's voice rose, forgetting to keep up the pretense. "He's your ATM. All you had to do was keep him happy, keep the money flowing. Was that too much to ask? Did you ever think for one second that maybe my family's reputation was on the line, that our entire future depended on this?" And there it was, the truth stripped bare of all its pretty decorations. It wasn't about love or commitment or building a life together. It was about his family's reputation, their future, a business transaction. Danielle stared at him, tears welling in her eyes, a look of dawning horror on her face. She had traded her father's unconditional love for this. She had been so blinded by the glittering facade of his world that she never bothered to check the foundation. And now it was crumbling to dust all around her. The unraveling of a family's reputation is a quiet thing at first. It is the slow turning of heads, the sudden interest in a wine glass or a floral arrangement, the way conversations die down when you approach. The Harrisons were experiencing this in real time. Their friends, the people they had golfed with and summered with for decades, were now looking at them with a new, unwelcome expression: pity. The illusion of effortless wealth, an illusion they had spent their entire lives cultivating, was dissolving under the harsh lights of the ballroom. Mr. Harrison, his face pale and blotchy, pulled Trevor and Danielle into a small alcove away from the prying eyes of their departing guests. His voice, usually so full of blustering confidence, was a ragged whisper. "There was a problem with the bank transfer," he lied, mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief. "A temporary hold. It will be sorted out." But his eyes betrayed him. They were the eyes of a man on the edge of a cliff. Trevor, whose own panic was curdling into anger, wasn't buying it. "A temporary hold, Dad. They're taking the flowers off the walls. The chef is threatening to call the police. This isn't a hold." Mrs. Harrison. Catherine began to sob, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. "Henry, you have to tell him," she whimpered, clutching her husband's arm. "You have to tell them the truth." Henry Harrison seemed to shrink before my daughter's eyes. The proud patriarch, the man who had looked down on me from across a polished dinner table, now looked like a frightened old man. He couldn't look at his son. He looked at the floor as he spoke. "There is no money, Trevor. The business, it hasn't been profitable for years. We've been living on credit, on our name alone. We hoped this wedding, the generosity of Danielle's father, would give us the capital we needed to recover. It was supposed to be our lifeline." There it was, the ugly, unvarnished truth. This wedding was never a celebration of love. It was a business merger. It was a hostile takeover of my life's work with my daughter as their willing Trojan horse. They weren't welcoming a daughter, they were acquiring an asset. And the asset had just refused to be liquidated. You see, I am a builder, and a good builder never breaks ground without first surveying the land and testing the soil. You have to know what you're building on. You have to understand the risks, the hidden dangers beneath the surface, and people are no different from land. Before I would ever agree to invest the kind of money this wedding cost, an amount that could fund a dozen college educations or build a wing on a hospital, I needed to survey the ground upon which my daughter was choosing to build her future. So I did what I have always done. I called Marcus. Marcus, I had said to him months ago, I want you to do a full due diligence report on Harrison & Sons Incorporated and on Trevor Harrison personally. I want to know everything: financials, debts, assets, credit lines. I want to see the blueprints of their entire life. Marcus is thorough. He is methodical. The report he delivered a week later was a 50-page document that read like an autopsy of a dying empire. It detailed years of mismanagement of leveraged loans taken out against a declining business. The Harrison fortune was a house of cards propped up by their reputation and the willingness of banks to keep lending them money based on a name that no longer carried any real weight. They were drowning in debt from their mansion to their country club membership. And Trevor was the hollowest pillar of all. He had a fancy title at his father's company, Vice President of Development, but the report showed he had no real salary. His life was funded by a corporate credit card that was perpetually maxed out. He had no savings, no investments, no career of his own. He was a 32-year-old man living on an allowance from a company that was already bankrupt in all but name. He wasn't a partner for my daughter. He was a dependent. He was looking for someone to take care of him, and he had found my daughter and through her my wallet. Reading that report, I felt a cold knot of dread in my stomach, but I also felt a strange sense of relief, because it confirmed the feeling I had in my gut the first time I met them. My instincts, honed by 50 years of navigating the cutthroat world of construction, had screamed at me that something was wrong. They had insisted on meeting at their country club, a place designed to intimidate to establish a home field advantage. The dining room was quiet, full of old white couples speaking in hushed tones. The silverware was heavy, the glasses were crystal, and the air was thick with the suffocating weight of unearned privilege. I felt their eyes on me the moment I walked in, the sole black man in the room not wearing a waiter's uniform. The conversation was a polite interrogation. They asked about my business, but they weren't interested in my journey, only my destination. They wanted to quantify my wealth, to assess the value of the asset their son was acquiring. Then came the moment that I will never forget. Catherine Trevor's mother leaned forward, placing her perfectly manicured hands on the table. She gave me a smile that was all teeth. "So, Charles," she said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic, "Danielle tells us you're in construction. How fascinating." She paused, letting the word construction hang in the air as if it were a slightly dirty secret. "I imagine you must have been very fortunate to get some of those big government contracts back in the 90s. There it was, the delicate surgical insertion of the knife, the subtle suggestion that my success was not my own, that a black man couldn't possibly build what I had built without a handout, without the system being rigged in his favor. She was invalidating my entire life's work with a single, condescending question. She was reminding me that in her world I would always be an outsider, a guest whose presence required an explanation. I didn't get angry. I met her gaze across the table. I thought of the countless 16-hour days, the weekends spent poring over blueprints, the injuries, the risks, the payrolls I had to meet when I could barely pay myself. I thought of my Rose packing my lunch every single day for 30 years. I thought of everything I had built, not with luck, but with sweat and grit and sheer unrelenting will. I gave her a small, tight smile of my own. "No, ma'am," I said, my voice calm and even, but carrying a weight that silenced the table. I wasn't fortunate. I was just the first man on the job site every morning and the last man to leave every night. I didn't get government contracts. I had a strong back, 2 good hands, and a name that people learned they could trust. I built my company, Mrs. Harrison, the same way I build my buildings, from the ground up, 1 brick at a time. Her smile vanished. For the first time that evening, she had nothing to say. I had refused to accept the box she tried to put me in, but the damage was done. The first crack in the foundation had appeared. I knew then that these were not good people. They were weak people hiding behind a name. and they would drain the life out of my daughter to keep their own charade going. And in that moment, the Rose Foundation protocol went from being a possibility to a certainty. It was no longer a question of if I would need it, but when. Now standing amidst the wreckage of her dream wedding, Danielle was finally seeing the truth. The confession from Mr. Harrison. The panicked look in Trevor's eyes, it all clicked into place. She was a pawn in their desperate financial game. Her father, the man she had just publicly humiliated and dismissed, was the one person who had seen the truth all along. The shame hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her hand going to her mouth. She had traded a king for a joker, a fortress for a house of cards. Trevor, seeing his last hope slipping away, turned his fury on her. The charming fiancé was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. "This is your fault." He snarled, his voice a low, vicious hiss that was meant for her ears only. "This is all your fault. If you had just handled your father, none of this would be happening." Danielle looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "My fault? What was I supposed to do, Trevor? He's my father. He's your ATM." Trevor shot back, his voice cracking with rage. "That's what he is. Your only job was to keep him happy, to keep the money flowing. You couldn't even do that. You let him walk all over us. You let him ruin everything." Something inside Danielle finally snapped. The years of trying to please him, of trying to fit into his world, of feeling ashamed of her own roots, it all burned away in a sudden cleansing fire of anger. "Ruin everything," she cried, her voice finally finding its strength. "He didn't ruin anything. He built everything. He built the building we're standing in. He built the life that you were so desperate to be a part of. The only thing that was ruined here was your pathetic little plan to use me and my family to bail out your own. You didn't love me. You were auditing me." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Trevor had no answer. He just stared at her, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The dream was over. The performance had ended, and all that was left was the ugly truth standing there for all the world to see. They found me where I knew they would. Not at my home, a place of quiet memories and solitude, but at my newest project, my sanctuary. I was standing on the unfinished rooftop of what would become the Rose Ellington Community Center, a 7-story building of steel and concrete rising from the heart of the city. There were no marble floors or crystal chandeliers up here. Just the raw, honest skeleton of a building, the smell of curing concrete, and a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline I had helped to build. The wind was steady, whipping at my suit jacket. Down below, the city was a river of lights. Up here, there was only peace. Their arrival shattered it. I heard their frantic footsteps on the temporary metal staircase long before I saw them. Danielle emerged first, her extravagant white dress now smudged with dirt, her face a mess of tears and running mascara. She looked like a ghost haunting a place she didn't belong. Trevor followed, his own expensive suit, rumpled, his face flushed with a desperate, impotent rage. He was a man who had lost control, and it was eating him alive. Danielle ran towards me, her voice a raw, pleading cry. "Dad, you have to fix this. You have to call them back. You've ruined everything. Everything." It was telling that everything to her meant a party, a performance, an illusion, not the 29 years of love and support that had led her to this day. I remained still, my hands resting on a steel safety rail, looking out at the city. I didn't turn to face them yet. Trevor, emboldened by my silence, stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty space. "We had a contract, an agreement. I'll sue you. I'll sue you for every penny you have, for breach of contract, for emotional distress, for humiliation." Humiliation. An interesting choice of words from a man who had stood by silently while my daughter turned me away from her wedding. I finally turned to face them, my expression calm. The wind tugged at my tie. I looked at my daughter, at the man she had chosen, and I felt a profound sadness, but my voice when it came was as solid and steady as the concrete beneath our feet. "There is nothing to fix, Danielle," I said quietly, "and there is no contract to sue over Trevor." I took a breath. It was time for the lesson. You see, there was never any of my money in that wedding, not a single dollar. Danielle stared at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? You paid for all of it." "No," I corrected her gently. "I didn't. The Rose Ellington Family Foundation paid for it. It's a trust, a legal entity I established with your mother years ago. Its purpose is not to give gifts. Its purpose is to make investments in the future of this family. And like any sound investment, it comes with terms and conditions. I let that sink in. I could see the wheels turning in Trevor's mind as he tried to find a legal angle, a loophole. He would not find one. I had hired the best lawyers in Georgia to draft this document. It was a fortress. I continued my gaze fixed on my daughter. The trust is governed by a single core principle. We called it the Dignity Clause. It's right there in the first article of the Charter. It states, and I quote, "All distributions from this trust must be used to honor and reinforce the core values of the Ellington family. These values include respect, honesty, and gratitude." I walked slowly towards her. The wind died down for a moment, and the only sound was the distant hum of the city. When you stood on the steps of a building that my company built at an event funded entirely by your mother's legacy, and you told me, the founder and sole benefactor of that trust, that I was not welcome, you did not just hurt my feelings, Danielle. From a legal standpoint, you publicly and irrevocably violated the Dignity Clause. A flicker of understanding of dawning horror appeared in her eyes. Trevor opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. I was not finished. According to the bylaws of the trust, when a core clause is breached, the trustee, in this case Marcus Vance, is not just allowed but is legally obligated to take immediate action to protect the assets of the foundation. That action includes the immediate clawback of any and all pending payments related to the breach. What happened tonight was not an act of revenge. It was the predictable, automatic execution of a contract you implicitly agreed to when you accepted the funds. It was business. The word business hung in the air, cold and sharp. I had used their own language, their own transactional view of the world, to explain the consequences of their actions. They had treated my love like a commodity, so I was showing them what it felt like when a commodity is recalled. Trevor, finally grasping the legal walls closing in around him, sputtered, "This is insane. You can't." "We'll still sue. We will sue you for ruining this venue's reputation. We'll sue you for conspiracy." I almost smiled. The desperation was pathetic. I turned my gaze from my daughter to him, and for the first time I let a hint of the steel in my soul show. "Sue me?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. I gestured around us at the steel beams reaching for the night sky, at the city lights twinkling below. "For ruining what venue's reputation?" I then looked down, as if noticing the ground beneath my feet for the first time. "You seem to be confused about the nature of my business. I don't just put up buildings, son. I develop the land they stand on." I let my gaze travel in the direction of the Magnolia Estates, a faint glow in the distance. "That beautiful piece of property the venue is on, I bought that entire tract of land 15 years ago. Ellington Holdings owns it, all of it. The Magnolia Estates isn't a client. They are a tenant. They operate on a commercial lease." I paused, letting the final piece of the puzzle fall into place. "A lease," I finished, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "that contains a morality clause of its own. A lease that I have instructed Marcus to terminate in the morning due to the embarrassing public incident that took place on my property tonight. So go ahead, try and sue me. But you should know that by tomorrow morning, the only thing left of your dream wedding venue will be an eviction notice nailed to the front door." Checkmate. The final wall of their delusion crumbled into dust. There was nowhere left for them to run, no one left to blame but themselves. Trevor stared at me, his mouth agape, his face a mask of utter disbelief and defeat. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world vanish in a puff of smoke, and in that moment of total ruin, his true nature finally irrevocably revealed itself. He turned on Danielle, his face contorting into a vicious, ugly sneer. The last vestiges of the charming, sophisticated man she thought she was marrying were stripped away, revealing the terrified, entitled child beneath. "You," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "This is all because of you. You and your worthless old man. I knew I should never have gotten involved with people like you. You're nothing but new money trash." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and stormed away, stumbling down the metal staircase, a coward fleeing the scene of his own destruction. He left Danielle standing there alone on that rooftop, the cold wind whipping through her ruined wedding dress, the weight of every bad decision she had ever made crashing down upon her. She stood there, surrounded by the honest, unfinished work of her father, finally forced to see the difference between what is built to last and what is merely for show. The silence that followed was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the peace I had felt before they arrived. It was a vacuum, a void left where a man's entire world had just been. Trevor stood there, his mouth slightly open, the city lights reflecting in his wide, unblinking eyes. He was processing the scale of his annihilation. It wasn't just the loss of the wedding money. It was the loss of the venue, the loss of his family's last chance, the loss of the illusion he had wrapped himself in his entire life. He had come here to threaten a king only to find out he was a pawn on a board the king owned outright. A strange sound escaped his lips. It was a laugh, but a broken, ugly thing with no humor in it. It was the sound of something snapping. "You," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "You old son of a bitch. You had this planned. You had this planned from the very beginning." He looked from me to Danielle, and his eyes, once filled with a smug sense of superiority, were now blazing with a raw, desperate hatred. All his life things had been given to him. Now, for the first time, something had been taken away, and he didn't know how to react with anything other than rage. He needed a target for his failure, a place to put the blame, and he found it in my daughter. He took a step towards her, his face twisted into a mask of contempt. "And you," he spat the word dripping with venom. "You were supposed to be the smart one. You were supposed to handle him. What good are you? What good was any of this?" Danielle flinched as if he had struck her. She looked at him, her own anger from moments before washed away by a fresh wave of shock and hurt. "Trevor, don't—" But he was beyond reason now. The dam of his civility had burst, and all the filth behind it came pouring out. "Don't what?" he sneered. "Don't tell the truth. You thought you were marrying into the Harrison family. You thought you were trading up. You were my last-ditch investment, Danielle, a walking, talking bailout package with a pretty face. And you couldn't even close the deal. I have seen buildings collapse. I have seen steel girders bend under pressure, but I had never seen a person crumble like my daughter did in that moment. Every insult, every cruel word was a sledgehammer blow to the fragile identity she had tried to build for herself. Your father was right," Trevor continued, his voice rising to a frantic shout. "He saw it from the beginning. You're just like him. New money trash, pretending to be something you're not. You put on the dress, you wear the diamonds, but you can't hide what you are. He's just a dirty old man who got lucky with some government contracts, and you're the failed gold digger who couldn't even secure the bag." I took a half step forward, a protective instinct rising in me hot and fierce, but I stopped myself. This was not my fight to finish. This was a demolition she needed to witness firsthand. She needed to see the rot in the foundation she had chosen. Danielle stood frozen, the tears on her face seeming to dry in the cold wind. She wasn't crying anymore. Her expression was one of numb, horrified clarity. She was finally seeing the real man behind the charming facade, the man who saw her not as a partner, but as a transaction, the man who, when faced with failure, chose to blame, to degrade, to destroy. He wasn't done. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, vicious whisper. "I was going to save my family. I was going to be the hero, and you ruined it. You couldn't control your own father. You let him walk away. You let him win." He laughed again, that same broken sound. "He wins. The old man wins. I hope you're happy with him." And with that, he turned his back on her. He walked to the staircase, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, the graceful confidence he once projected now completely gone. He was just a defeated man running from the truth. He disappeared down the stairs, and the sound of his footsteps faded, leaving only the whistle of the wind and the deep humming silence of the city below. They say that pressure doesn't build character, it reveals it. For months, Trevor had shown Danielle a carefully constructed character, the charming, wealthy, sophisticated man of her dreams. But the moment real pressure was applied, the facade shattered, and the character revealed was weak, cruel, and rotten to the core. Danielle stood alone on that rooftop for a long time, not moving, barely breathing. She was a statue in a ruined garden, a bride with no groom, a daughter with a broken heart. She had made a terrible bargain, and she had just paid the price. I stayed where I was, giving her the space she needed. This was a grief she had to feel on her own. The illusion wasn't just broken, it had been pulverized. She was standing in the wreckage of her own choices, and for the first time, there was no one else to blame. The foundation was gone. And now, if she was ever going to stand on her own 2 feet again, she would have to learn how to build a new one from the ground up. One brick at a time. Weeks passed. The autumn leaves in my yard turned from green to a fiery gold, carpeting the lawn in a blanket of color. The world moved on as it always does. The story of the failed Harrison wedding became a brief, scandalous piece of gossip in the high society circles of Atlanta, then faded, replaced by the next spectacle. The Magnolia Estates quietly closed its doors, the eviction notice a final, silent testament to the day's events. I heard through Marcus that the Harrisons had sold their mansion and moved out of state, disappearing from the world they had tried so desperately to cling to. Of Trevor, I heard nothing, and I asked for nothing. He was a ghost, a bad memory. I spent my days at the community center overseeing the final stages of its construction. There is a deep satisfaction in watching something real take shape and seeing blueprints and steel beams transform into a place of purpose. It was good, honest work. It kept my mind steady. I did not call my daughter. The next move had to be hers. The foundation had been cleared, but she was the one who had to decide if she wanted to build anything on it. Then one afternoon she came. I was sitting on my porch, the same porch where Rose and I had spent so many quiet evenings reading a book. Her car, a modest sedan I didn't recognize, pulled into the driveway. She got out slowly. She was different. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Her hair was pulled back and she wore no makeup. She looked younger and older all at once. She looked tired, but the desperate, anxious energy that had surrounded her for years was gone. For the first time in a long time, she looked real. She walked up the stone path and stood at the bottom of the porch steps, not assuming she was welcome to come up. She just stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes fixed on me. "Dad," she said, her voice quiet, almost fragile. I closed my book and placed it on the table beside me. I just waited. I knew this moment was not about me. It was about her. The words came slowly, each one heavy with a weight she had clearly carried for weeks. "I didn't come to ask for anything," she began, her gaze unwavering. "I came to say I'm sorry." She took a breath. "And not just for what I did at the wedding. I'm sorry for not seeing you, for being ashamed, for thinking that their world, that shiny, empty world, was worth more than you, more than Mom, more than us. I traded something real for something fake, and I'm so sorry for the disrespect I showed you." It was the apology I had waited years to hear. Not an apology for getting caught, but an apology for the crime itself. I saw no excuses in her eyes, no self-pity, only a deep and profound regret. I nodded slowly. I didn't need to say, "I forgive you." The forgiveness was in the listening. I stood up and went inside my house, leaving her on the path. I returned a moment later with 2 small items in my hand. I walked down the steps and stood in front of her. I held out my hand. In my palm lay a single simple key and a crisp business card. She looked at them, then at me, her expression full of confusion. "That," I said, pointing to the key, "is for a small 1-bedroom apartment in Midtown. It's clean, it's safe, and it's empty. The first month's rent and the security deposit have been taken care of. After that, it's yours to handle. It's a start." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She just looked at the key as if it were a lifeline. Then I tapped the business card. "And this is the contact information for a man named David Chen. He's a financial planner, a very good one. He is expecting your call." I paused, making sure she was listening carefully. "The Rose Ellington Foundation is still there, Danielle. Your mother's legacy is still there for you, but its terms have changed. It will no longer pay for parties or dresses or a life you haven't earned. From now on, it will operate as a partner. For every dollar you earn and put into a savings account, the foundation will match it. 1 for 1. You want to go back to school. You save for half, the foundation will match the other half. You want to start a small business. You write the business plan and secure half the funding. The foundation will be your first investor. You want to build a life for yourself, a real life, then the foundation will be your partner in that construction. But you, Danielle, have to be the lead contractor." I placed the key and the card in her hand and closed her fingers around them. Her tears were flowing freely now, but they were silent tears of what looked like relief, of understanding. She wasn't being given a handout, she was being given a chance, a blueprint, the tools to start over. She looked up at me. her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. It was all she could say, but it was enough. Love is a complicated thing. As a father, my first instinct was always to protect my daughter, to give her everything she wanted, to build a wall around her so nothing could ever hurt her. But Rose knew better. Rose knew that real love isn't about building walls to keep the world out. It's about giving your children the tools to build a foundation so strong that they can withstand any storm on their own. That day on the rooftop, I wasn't destroying my daughter's life. I was doing the painful, necessary work of demolition. I was tearing down a faulty structure built on a rotten foundation of lies and vanity so that something new and something true could one day be built in its place. Now I had given her the tools. The rest of the work was up to her. 6 months can feel like a lifetime. The Georgia sun was warm on my face as I stood on the steps of the newly completed Rose Ellington Community Center. The sound of a jazz band played, children laughed on the new playground behind me, and the air was filled with the smell of barbecue and fresh-cut grass. It was the grand opening, and the whole neighborhood had turned out. The mayor had just finished his speech, and I had just cut the big red ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors. The building was officially open. My tribute to my wife was complete. As the applause died down, I looked out over the crowd of smiling faces, and then I saw her. Danielle was standing near the back by a table with water bottles, handing them out to people. She wasn't dressed to impress. She wore a simple blue polo shirt with the community center's logo on it and a pair of khaki pants. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. She looked grounded. There was a quiet confidence in her posture I hadn't seen before. She wasn't looking for attention. She was just a part of things, a volunteer doing a small, necessary job. She caught my eye and gave me a small, shy smile. I smiled back. Later, as I was shaking hands and talking to community leaders, she approached me quietly. There was no big dramatic scene, no tears. She just waited patiently until I was free. "Congratulations, Dad," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It's a beautiful building. Mom would have loved it." "Yes," I said. "She would have." We stood in a comfortable silence for a moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. She handed it to me. "This is for you," she said. I opened it. Inside was a personal check written in her own neat handwriting. It was made out to me for the exact amount of her monthly rent. On the memo line, she had written 2 simple words, "Month 2." I looked at the check, then back at her. I saw in her eyes the pride of someone who had met a difficult obligation. She had earned this. She had paid her own way. This small piece of paper was more valuable than any $100,000 wedding. It was real. I folded the check carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. I didn't say much. I just placed my hand on her shoulder for a moment and gave a single proud nod. It was all that needed to be said. She understood. I watched her walk back to her volunteer post, her step a little lighter than before. I looked at her and I no longer saw a princess in a ruined dress. I saw a builder wearing her work clothes, standing on a patch of ground she had cleared herself. She was holding a hammer in one hand and a blueprint in the other. My Rose used to say that love isn't about giving people what they want. It's about giving them the tools to build what they need. For years, I had given my daughter a finished palace, and she had gotten lost in its empty rooms. That day, all I had given her was a key, a set of tools, and a challenge. The check in my pocket was the first brick she had laid for her new life. The foundation was now solid. The rest of it she would have to build herself. And for the first time in a very long time, I had no doubt that she would. This whole experience taught me a fundamental truth, one that as a builder I should have known all along. The most important foundation we can ever lay is not made of concrete but of character. I spent years giving my daughter a beautiful house, but I failed to teach her how to build her own. True love, I've learned, is not shielding our children from every storm, but giving them the tools and the blueprint to construct a shelter of their own. A shelter built with the strong materials of dignity, hard work, and self-respect. A structure built on that ground will never collapse. Let me know in the comments if you believe that tough love is sometimes the truest love of all.